Is software architecture obsolete, Uncle Bob? Hello. I'm Chris Athanas. I'm a KMP developer. Tech support said they're coming out for that thing on Tuesday. All right, we're gonna listen to some more Uncle Bob, my favorite guy. You're mine, yours and mine favorite guy to discuss his pontifications about software development, which it's unclear if he's done any more actually real commercial producing software in the last decade. He may have done it at one time, but at the time he was doing it, it was like toy level. Has he written anything that we can take to look at, like a real commercially available an app or some back end code or something more than just examples? No, no studies about your techniques and people using your techniques versus not using, blind, double blind studies. No, no, just pontificate. Okay, let's see what you had to say this time, Uncle Bob. Let's get into it.
Said there are folks in the Agile community who say that architecture is obsolete, that all you have to do is let the architecture emerge.
I have heard this. I think it was a trend there for a couple of years, but it's also okay. It's maybe when you're doing the proof of concept, maybe like while you're working on the MVP and you're doing pivoting and stuff, maybe then the architecture will kind of emerge. But really, you should have something in mind that you're trying to create, and to have the architecture already kind of established to how you're going to produce the solution for the customers that they're going to pay for. So the architecture is kind of like built in. What goes where? Who goes? What goes? Who's coming in? Who's leaving? So this emerging. I mean, maybe for proof of concept, I guess is what he's talking about, but not production code. What? No.
This has always been ridiculous. None of the people at the Agile Manifesto meeting in Utah thought that.
Well, are you sure, Bob? Because they were kind of making hints around it that about this, like the working software over comprehensive documentation is kind of a dig on that, and the collaboration over contract negotiation is kind of a dig on that. So maybe it's like a bigger project. You're trying to like figure out what needs to be done and where, instead of having it all done up front. You're just talking to people, and we can discover it along the way as we create the proof of concept and the MVP, and then the first version. And then we're gonna throw all this stuff away, by the way. And then we're gonna do the next version, the second version. Every time it's gonna be tighter and tighter and more fit for purpose, and more into what the users, what we want it to do, how we want to work with it, because it's ours. We live in the code, and then we're providing the solutions for the customers in a profitable way. This is what we're doing.
We all thought that it was a good idea not to invest massive amounts of time up front trying to design every last little bit of the software.
Correct. That was a big mistake, but people did it anyway.
But none of us thought that architectures emerged from nothing.
I mean, we're okay. This is where it gets a little philosophical. Where does it come from, Bob? If it doesn't come from nothing, where does it come from? Isn't it come from our imaginations? Isn't this software? Like, don't we kind of have to like imagine it in our minds first? And where does that come from, Bob? No? Don't know? Okay. I'm being pedantic, but I'm trying to make a point. He just goes off on this gish, and he makes you imagine what he's talking about. He just never gets nailed down anything. He just kind of just he does a Captain Kirk impersonation. It comes from nothing. It's like what?
And if you had polled any of us back then, you would have heard us tell you that no software system can be assembled at any kind of scale unless some thought had been put into what the structure of that software system is going to be.
Well, of course, yes, but I mean, also the point is let's not be like, okay, this is the only way it must be done, because there's a lot of guys doing that shit too. The way I figured it out is the ultimate way. There can be no other way. There was a lot of that going on. So how do you adjust that for that? Let's keep going.
So let me dispel that particular illusion right now. Agile is not the absence of architecture. Agile is simply a
that message didn't get through. Move fast and break things took precedence, Bob.
framework in which we can apply a good architecture.
Okay, I mean, that's not how we hope. But do you tell us how to do that, Bob? You don't. You don't tell us.
Now, is architecture fixed? When you initially decide what shape the system is going to be, is that the shape that the system will be?
A lot of tapes, a lot of my times that is the shape it will be. Well, a lot of projects I've worked on, you try and change something, it's like we can't do that. It's a legacy. We've got 16 customers on that database. We can't change it. It's like a lot of that stuff too. So like honestly, these the way that these IDEs and these operating systems and how we put these things together, how much we have to change them, and how much we're expected. Like these IDEs don't really expect you to change them, and these languages aren't really set up for it. I don't know. There's been a lot of cape. I think a lot of this stuff is like I like to say, a lot of this stuff, how these techniques, how to write these things in an efficient way. It's trade secrets. We're talking about billion-dollar companies, Bob.
And the answer to that is no. Because as you begin to write the individual lines of code and as you begin to assemble the modules in that system, you will find that there are pressures created by those modules and by those lines of code that impinge upon the architecture and cause it to change shape.
The way he's anthropomorphizing is just like, I don't know if it really does that. Humans might like want to like if you give a certain architecture you want to be done a certain way, people are gonna try and fit their stuff in there, man. If you're on a team with other people, because if you're going off in the weeds, you're not gonna be on that team for much longer. So yes, they're gonna try and fit it in however the architecture's been set up at that particular moment. Okay.
And this changing shape of the architecture continues every time someone adds a new feature or asks for a change to a feature. Or
Is that really architecture? If just making a feature is gonna change it? Bob, is this really? I think this seems like the old. Maybe you're referring to the old procedural way, where that is how things were done. You got to change one thing here is going to mess up everything else. It wasn't creating this and modular. It wasn't didn't have that encapsulation, and nothing was encapsulated. Everything was interrelated with everything else. Got static references because it's performant.
or adds a new facility to the system. That puts pressure on the architecture, and the architecture must respond. Therefore, the architecture is a living, breathing thing. It changes.
Okay, sort of. I mean, what kind of things that you don't want to change? If you have an input system, I mean, maybe you have to add to it or modify it, but you have to have the input coming from somewhere. So it's a lot of this stuff. It's like, what kind of changes are you talking about? He never gets into it. I've listened to hours of this guy. He never says, he never defines this stuff. He's just very vague and very pontificating. Captain Cook, we're going to beam down to the planet and hope you don't have a red shirt on.
Changes with the system on a day-to-day basis. It is not some fixed map that we all follow for the next 10 years.
Well, but usually it is actually. I don't know where you've been working, but a lot of times those things are kind of set, and that until we get rid of it, and we're dealing with working with and every stuff until we get rid of it, that's kind of is the way. I got $1 million in that source code, and I'm not gonna give it up for your new architecture ideas because they will just back because the tools we're using to build this stuff and how we're modifying it we'll just be back to the same place unless you get real strict about what Alan Kay was talking about, which is I've yet to find anybody who's totally into that stuff like I am. It's like we need to get faster. We can do a static reference here. It's like no, man, that's a big no. Listen to Igor Bigayinko. He goes into detail about why that is a big problem. All right, I've ranted long enough. Give me a like and subscribe and drop a comment.